You might think only political extremists or suicide bombers hold extreme views, but unless you recognize the nature of mind, which is beyond all extremes, you're always holding on to partial or extreme view one way or another. If you haven't seen through self, you're holding on to one of the most extreme views in nature. This episode explores the nature of compounded phenomenon, how karmas and generational traumas are formed, and the most effective way to work through conditioning through purification, absorption, and view refinement. What is right view, right action, and right effort? And how to incline your mind to the right view to reveal the omnipresent nature of mind. Meditation versus view refinement, how a view distorts your field of experience, creating a concavity, the structural self-reference of experience, and how domes of perception arise and shift. How to find rest and illusion, both of nirvana and samsara, overcoming the fear of the void and of nihilism, teaching AI how to do self-inquiry, the tantric nature of photography and how it relates to sex, the limits of arhatship, the 10 Bhumis of the bodhisattva path to Buddhahood, and the cloud of Dharma. How does the experience manifest, and how is this moment created? So you have to answer that question, right, non-conceptually. This is a breakdown to understand non-conceptually views and the nature of compounded phenomena. First, you have root formation, formational patterns, and the process of phenomena compounding that are reinforced and conditioned over and over through life circumstances. Many of them formed in our childhood or even before birth. Even though root formations are not a thing because there are no nouns in the universe, only verbs, one can expediently pin down these holding patterns and underlying core beliefs with words as something like, I am not good enough, I am special, only love can complete me, etc. 2. Afflictions, which is formation, the above, consciousness, and ignorance, and that's the first 3 links of the dependent origination cycle. They codependently arise to create afflictions, which is the split in consciousness into subject, object, the known, the unknown, past, future, present, etc. Which means that if you're ignorant of this entire process of creation, just by being conscious, your mind is already afflicted. And affliction exists in positive, negative, and neutral states. Unless you examine this through the wisdom eye, which is the nature of mind, root formations or afflictions cannot be easily detected because they operate at the pre-verbal level. 3, you have obscurations. Afflictions then creates cognitive and emotional obscurations, such as emotional disturbances, triggers, thought loop, mental and emotional proliferations. Obscurations are not always negative, just like afflictions, right? Bliss and dualness can both be obscurations. Then you have obstructions, which is how obscurations and all of the above manifest as life obstacles. Your habitual tendencies, behavior patterns, addictions, and so on, like a messy room or even a clean room. Right? Some people can get really OCD cleaning a room, right? So obstruction can seem positive on the surface, which means that if one is ignorant about the nature of compounded phenomena, your entire life can be one big fat obstruction, even if everything seems fine at the moment. And this is not a linear process. It's more like a mandala, right? Which means that all the above reinforce one another and codependent arise with the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, cognition, and fabrication to create views, which creates an invisible dome or a concavity in your field of experience. Obstruction is the manifestation of root formation and everything else in between and vice versa. So the micro, the atomic structure of the root formation, which can't even be detected because it's so deep down into the subconscious, manifests in the most macro level of your life. Views go way deeper than concepts, ideas, and worldviews. They are the geometries of your mind and reality. The geometries are the sort of the structure of your being and presence, the container of your entire existence. If there isn't a non-conceptual understanding of this entire process of the nature of phenomenon and how this moment is created, everything we do to awaken, every solution we find to solve a problem further proliferates our karmas and conditionings. Because one cannot get out of samsara using samsara or through samsara. Purify obscuration with more obscurations, or trying to solve a problem using the same conditioning as the problem itself, because the answer will still be coming from the same conditioning, unless one has the right view. So the most direct solution to step out of this endless cycle of catch-22 is to rest and recognize. Now, resting is not the same as letting go or peace or equanimity. It's the fitness to be with whatever is arising. And just let unprocessed materials come up without reaction to de-escalate further proliferations. Recognition means to recognize in each moment the nature of all phenomena, to be impermanent and without a true essence or self, and how they're compounded, and how is this moment created through the process described above. With enough training in yogic power, recognition merging with rest happens in an instant. Rest and recognize is to be self-invalidated once their functions are served. Ultimately, there's nowhere to rest on and nothing to recognize. I actually wrote that for you, bro. don't like verify it into like a step-by-step thing, I mean, in a sense, it can be looked at as step-by-step, like, oh, this is root formation, this is affliction, obscuration. But like I said, it's like a loop, right? It's like every one of these things reinforces and connected to all the other ones to create like pretty much your view. I've been talking about how you can't really see the afflictions. Sure, you can't see the affliction until you have like really strong fitness or like really develop yogic power, or even you can't really detect it unless you kind of observe in a non-observational kind of observation, or like non-dual awareness kind of observation, quote unquote. Because if you observe it from the observer, you're just creating more splits, right? That's what afflictions are. It's a dual consciousness. You still reinforce it in self-view, but you can detect your afflictions through your obscurations and through your obstructions. Why is my life fucked up like this? Why am I like feeling like I have to go to the clubs every weekend? That obstruction is manifested from your root formations and obscuration and affliction, and all those things, like they just reinforce each other. So it's not completely true to say you can't see your view or root formation. You can see it on a more gross level. But then to really get to the bottom of things and to really to pull the weeds out from the roots, then not only do you have to see what's available to you right now, which is your obstructions and obscurations, emotional and cognitive, but then you have to develop enough fitness and put in the reps. If you meditate without right view, that's like trying to climb a cliff with one hand. If you have the right view but don't meditate or put in the reps or practice, it's like a rich person who is also a miser. If you have the view and you meditate, you are a bird flying. One of the wing is the right view, the other wing is meditation. Other words for the ultimate liberating view of no view is a non-dual awareness, suchness, empty luminosity, the unconditioned, the unborn, the deathless, the nature of mind completely unimpeded, beyond all reference points and extremes, at least a mind which is inclined towards the above. So the 3 pillars of practice in our contemplative CrossFit bootcamp, purification, absorption, and view refinement codependent rise, and they reinforce each other until they all roll into one. Every time you rest into the object of absorption and allow whatever unprocessed materials to surface without conceptual labels, judgments, or reactions, the mind becomes more purified. Then the view becomes more clear, which then renders the process of absorption more effortless to allow for more purification, hence a more spacious view. You continue to rest and recognize until your mind is without stains and omnipresent. What happens if someone doesn't have the right view? Well, they suffer and they cling. Basically, all quote-unquote wrong view can be boiled down to a self-view of various degrees of densities and subtleties. Without the right view, you can be practicing for years and decades, have shifts after shifts, deeper jhanas and longer cessations, endlessly dissolving conditionings, becoming more and more spacious or blissful, yet you'll still be perpetuating the same self-becoming cycle or starting condition that got you here in the first place.
Yes, sir. Buildings are towering now as high as 20 stories. And moving pictures flicker up on a big screen.
Like a snake eating its own tail, shedding it out, and continuously construct bigger and more luminous and spacious or even non-dual box or container, yet this container or view is still being constructed out of the conditionings that you think you're dissolving. So you're just falling deeper and deeper into delusions, brah.
We have almost 8,000 automobiles in this country, and we can travel by train from New York to California in less than 7 days.
I have listed expediently the 5 stages of awakening in my previous videos. The first is the ego stage. The second is the witness. The third is God consciousness, or Brahman. The fourth is nothingness or emptiness. All these are subtleties of the self-view, which must be transcended and go beyond. With wrong views, the mind thinks reality is what it conceives to be, which is conceit, instead of the way things truly are. One refine their views by contemplating, inquiring, practicing meditation, or maybe do some psychedelics if used correctly. Although refining views can be understood intellectually on a very gross and surface level, views go much deeper than ideas and concepts or worldviews. It is the foundation of your entire existence. Another way I describe it is this invisible dome that concaves inward. For the mind to be completely unimpeded, the dome is convex outwards without any boundary, separation, or concavities. The only difference between Buddhas and sentient beings is that we are conditioned to compress and contract and twist Buddha nature into a view with reference points of here and there, past, future, present, apprehended, the real and the unreal, self and others, and etc. All there is to realization is a recognition of what's always and already the case. And since there's nothing but the ultimate view, that is the nature of mind, all that is happening on the path to liberation can be boiled down to view refinement and the purification of obscurations and afflictions that are in the way of truth. If you don't continuously refine your views, you can impute the fact that you have the right view from the reference of a partial view and bypass. Statements like, oh, this is it, it's what's already the case, it's not definitively wrong, but are you truly free of afflictions? Ultimately, there is no path, but at the same time, there is a process of purification. Can you hold both views simultaneously and then go beyond even the distinction between purity and impurity? The only way to access the unconditioned is through with and as the conditionings. This is why we must accept every part of our being, both the negative and the positive, the good and the bad, the beautiful and the ugly, and pay homage to our afflictions. You want to know what the nature of mind is? It's the entire range of your being. What you truly are cannot be touched by the conditionings, yet at the same time, it is not apart from the conditionings themselves. It is through the starting condition of samsara that we come to realize nirvana until you transcend both of these dualities and have no preference for neither.
Well, we have one of those new talking machines, plays music right here in our home.
All phenomenal existence, samsara and nirvana, have but a single ground. And yet, there are two paths and two results. These are the display of knowledge or of ignorance.
And we've got a house full of new electrical servants. Mr. Edison sure added life to our home.
The recognition of that groundless ground is Buddhahood, but being failed to recognize it and they wander therefore in samsara.
Whoa there, you'll blow a fuse.
We've all seen that all phenomena, both samsara and nirvana, are by definitions illusions. For whether imprisoned in samsara or free in the enlightened state, the mind retains a kind of a phenomenological activity which we call the self-experience. The phenomena of samsara are the mind's deluded perception of the three worlds and the six realms, all marked by impermanence, endless repetition, and pain. By contrast, the phenomena of nirvana are the kayas and the wisdom of the compassionate unfolding of enlightened activities, the qualities of self-cognizing awareness. In that they are phenomenon, the six realms of samsara and the kayas of wisdoms of nirvana are all illusory. They appear but are not truly existence. They have no intrinsic being. There are two kinds of illusions, therefore, the illusion of mistaken perception and the illusion of perfect purity, or rather, illusions that are perfectly pure. When pursued and investigated further, however, the notion of illusion becomes more difficult to grasp. Given that the state of both samsara and nirvana are illusory, one may be tempted to suppose that the ground, the foundational level of the mind upon which such illusions arise, must in some sense be real, the basis in relation to which the illusions arise. But nothing, not even emptiness itself, is able to withstand analysis. Even self-cognizing awareness, the fundamental ground of all illusory appearances, is in itself devoid of intrinsic being and therefore another illusion. If the nature of the mind were ultimately real and not illusory, it would necessarily be a self-existent transcendental entity, a view no different than the Brahman or the Atman. Since the qualities of enlightenment have been described as illusory, to the unenlightened state, the answer is simply to abandon the illusion of samsara and opt for the illusion of nirvana. It might be possible to speak in such terms expediently or conventionally, or figuratively even, and yet a more profound understanding is called for. Although the illusion of samsara are without any intrinsic being, they appear unceasingly, they are like a traveler, and just as one might give rest to exhausted travelers as they go on their way, illusory appearances, that is, whatever the mind perceives, must be brought to rest in the utterly pure expanse of the Dharma Dhatu. Not only is samsara an illusion, even nirvana is like a dream, like a magical illusions. The distinction between nirvana and samsara, between the ultimate and the relative, are merely mind's distinctions. It is then that the yogis seem like an aimless lunatic, free of clinging, free of care, bereft of hope and fear. They do not alter anything that manifests. All for them is equal and elusive, neither real nor not real, neither existing nor non-existing. They realize this without effort, thus resting in illusions. All these emotions and all these thoughts can still exist and they can still arise, but then you see through to the lack of adherency. That's emptiness. Yeah. So you can have experience of no self or self. Doesn't matter. No self, it's also empty of inherent existence. Self is also it's just an appearance. It's just an appearance. Really see how your mind is, even in the most subtle level, trying to verify or grasp onto any kind of state or view. You're saying something like you're feeling nihilistic because you experience no self, no God. Something like that, right? That's an extreme view of non-being, for example.
There is actually a fear of non-existence
and
annihilation.
Yes, that's called the fear of emptiness. But I want to point out that the fear of emptiness only arises because you're verifying emptiness. You're making no self into a thing that If it's not a thing, you can't be scared of it. Like I said, it's a non-implicative negation. It's not a thing. In a sense, it doesn't exist. But then again, you don't want to reify that into non-being because the mind is always going to try to grasp onto something to find a ground. My favorite Disney character was the Magic Carpet. What's yours? To reify means to make something solid and substantial. People are afraid of the void or emptiness because they think it's something real, when in fact the insight is to see through to the lack of intrinsic existence in all phenomena, including emptiness itself. If you think emptiness means things don't exist, you're clinging on to non-existence, which means you're clinging on to existence. By saying something doesn't have a meaning, you are giving it a meaning. Can you perceive things as being there but not there? You can say emptiness is what gets revealed when you negate everything, including the process of negation itself. So in a sense, there is no such thing as emptiness per se, but in the most mindfuckery and paradoxical way possible, it is what you are. Infinite potentiality that's self-aware. That's why Anatta realization or not self is not a thing that you can obtain. So the fear of emptiness is completely irrational. So expediently speaking, whatever you're afraid of isn't emptiness per se, it's what you imagine to be emptiness, which on the ultimate level, it is nothing but that which cannot be conceived.
Don't touch anything.
To realize not self is to claim every aspect of the self. Whatever you're afraid to look at, look there. When non-doership and surrendering is pushed to the extreme, it becomes full and total ownership, reality owning itself. This is where you can will without agency, think without thoughts, and be totally you without a truly inherently existent self. This is why the natural state has a quality of unconditional confidence, because it is nothing but knowing itself, through and through with full acceptance. The nature of mind, pure and luminous, is itself intrinsically an illusion of utter purity. Within this nature of mind, which is free from the conceptual elaboration of self and others, all the illusions of mistaken perception, as well as all hallucinatory appearances and thoughts, finds rest in being groundless and unsupported. To attain liberation from samsara, therefore, is not simply a matter of exchanging one set of illusion for another. On the contrary, freedom from the hallucinatory and deceptive power of illusion is achieved by primarily knowing that it is an illusion, that it lacks intrinsic existence or being. Consequently, once the illusion nature of phenomena appearance is asserted, once its constitution and the reason for its appearing are understood non-conceptually, one is no longer deluded, even if the illusory phenomenon continues to manifest. As Nagarjuna pointed out, samsara and nirvana are not two separate things. Instead, they are two ways of perceiving the same phenomenal field. Samsara is in itself just deluded thought. And with the nature of mind is seen, it is nirvana, therefore, from the beginning. It is primal wisdom free from all fixations and reference points. That in self-knowing knows its object. There is no apprehending it as this or that. The mind finds comfort in this state, where mind and what appears are seen as emanated apparatuses. Again, this is what it means by resting in illusions. Samsara consists of discursive thoughts. When it is understood that these have no existence even though they appear, in other words, when the empty nature of mind is realized, nirvana, the state beyond sorrow, automatically manifests. So thoughts and appearances sink back into emptiness without leaving any trace. When everything is illusion, then nothing is. When in doubt, investigate and go beyond the four extremes. Number 1, being. That's attachment or craving for existence. This is the view of eternalism, or oh, everything's one. Number 2, non-being, attachment to non-existence. This is the view of nihilism. Oh, I must get rid of the self. Ego is bad. The craving to become something is no different than the craving to become nothing, because clinging is aversion. Number 3, both existence and non-existence. Number 4, neither existence nor non-existence. The more liberating view is somewhere in the middle. However, if one is liberated from both sides of the extremity, one also transcends the view in the middle. The view without middle and extreme is the perfect view. This is the unsurpassable view, and whoever attains this view will attain omniscience.
We've come a long way, though, since the turn of the century. You know that pilot fella, Charles Lindbergh? He's about to fly a single-wing airplane all the way across the Atlantic.
Now, this process of view refinement and purification can be extremely subtle and tricky, because the mind has a tendency to rarefy everything, to make substantial and grasp onto anything and make it into a ground of identification, including the sense of groundlessness, by turning no view into a view, for example, or rarefying vast spacious awareness into the big self, without realizing that emptiness is also emptied of itself. Again, emptiness doesn't mean that things don't exist. It simply means that phenomena lack inherent existence. Once you think something doesn't exist, you're already falling into the extreme view of non-existence and nihilism. So you gotta keep going meta, meta, meta. Self-invalidate even the process of self-invalidation. Since anatta is a non-implicative negation, Self-invalidation becomes instant when you have the right view. All compounded phenomena cease on their own accord. The mind sees through to its own lack of inherency and cuts through the illusion of self and world faster than the speed of light. So fast that you transcend even the distinction between permanence and impermanence. Phenomena arise and pass away, compounding and decompounding, compressing and decompressing simultaneously. That is just the nature of reality. The most subtle level of view refinement requires a tremendous amount of yogic power.
To infinity and beyond.
Can you rest as that event horizon between the known and the unknown, between consciousness and subconsciousness, and to recognize the instant consciousness starts splitting itself. Otherwise, whatever methods of investigation or inquiry that you use is still coming from duality or the self-view, because you're just using that split consciousness to do the observation or inquiry, which just creates more splits and proliferations. At the microscopic level, you can feel like you're tuning at the deepest regions of your mind, particle by particle, from ignorance to wisdom, as you continuously upgrade your sentience. So that's just giving you an example of how you can go at a subtle and subtle level, seeing how your mind is holding on to a view, and then it's holding on to another view, and it's holding on to another view at a more subtle and subtle layers. And then you just keep self-invalidating whatever view that you're holding on to without falling into any extremes, because the nature of mind is beyond all extremes. Because once you start doing the self-invalidation, a lot of people just verify that process of negation, and then they find themselves being nihilistic, or they're holding on to emptiness. So they just turn emptiness into another view, right? Or they take dependent origination or the middle way, whatever ground they deem to be the ultimate truth. But this is beyond truth, right? Beyond even the beyond. But be careful not to continuously negate everything. Oh, I gotta negate the negation, blah, blah, blah. Non-stop. Because you can easily fall into the extreme of non-being, right? Or you go to people and be like, hey, you're sitting on the ground, bro. This is groundless. Because at some point, you're just gonna be okay with resting as appearance. And then you just gotta be able to keep seeing that. That's part of the rest and recognize. And all these views, okay, there's no view that is intrinsically right or wrong. There are partial views which can all arise to perform a certain function. Like when you go out with friends, you can construct or aggregate a self view for that in that moment. And you see through the lack of inherency, so it doesn't matter if you feel like a self. If you go on nature, take a walk, I can decompound phenomenons and just aggregate in a way where I feel like infinite spaciousness. But that's not ultimately more or less real than any other way of configuration of the five aggregates of form, feeling, perception, fabrication, and consciousness. And the aggregates and the geometries of being and presence is constantly shape-shifting due to countless webs of causal conditionings, right? People are attached to mystical experiences or psychedelic highs because they're grasping onto and verifying phenomena when it's in the process of decompounding. And they're like, oh, I want to go back to the ultimate. There's no need to force an ultimate view. Instead of seeing how different views, states of minds are just different ways that the mind is aggregating, and that there is no ultimate pattern or aggregation that is more or less real or ultimate than any others, right? Because phenomena are constantly compressing and decompressing, compounding and decompounding. But your true nature is beyond all that. All these different states, jhanas, whatever, expansion, contraction, they're all conditioned phenomena. Yeah. But your true nature is the unconditioned. But the unconditioned is not apart from the conditioned. Because if you think the unconditioned is completely different or is completely apart from the conditioned, then you're creating another view. Oh, the view of the unconditioned, the unmanifested. But you can't say they're the same either, because that's also a view. You can't say that, oh, the unconditioned is the conditioned, or the unmanifested is the manifested, because that's just another side of the extreme. Everything is the same is an extreme view, right? And everything is different is also another extreme view. So when people say, oh, everything is one, they're still making a distinction about how nothing has a distinction. You try to separate the conditioned from the unconditioned, you separate samsara from nirvana, or you say they're just the same thing. So the more liberating view is neither the same nor different.
Okay.
But then you gotta watch how your mind can turn that into another view too. You see how that we're working with some very subtle layers of view refinement, so to speak.
Welcome to the island.
If the unborn is exactly the same as the born, then there will be nothing to realize. If the unmanifested is completely different from the manifested, then there will be no place for us to have the realization from. Which means that the unconditioned is to be recognized through, with, and as the conditioned.
Put your hands in the air, we can party all night.
One thing I noticed when doing self-inquiry is that when discarding each thought, there is a tiny bit of freedom that comes almost instantly. Is that the true self?
That might be a tiny slither of it, but thoughts are also part of the true self of not self. You're just expediently making a distinction between true self and everything else. One can expediently create an anchor or point of reference to stand on in order to dissolve or invalidate another ground. But always remember to self-invalidate and with a remedy or whatever ground one is choosing to stand on to freefall in infinity as infinity. First, you create a temporary ground or an anchor, like a vipassionalizer to do the vipassana, in order to scan the body through the observer. Then you vipassionalize even the vipassionalizer and the process of vipassionalizing itself. That's another example of the process of self-invalidation and view refinement. Even with that said, separation is also part of the non-separation, if that makes sense. First, you realize everything is one as a remedy to the state of separation. Then you realize what is both the one and the many as remedy to invalidate the previous insight. Then you realize what is neither one nor the many to invalidate that, and then you see what's left. If you take the not this, not that approach all the way, even awareness of the one who is doing the inquiry is to be self-invalidated as not this or that. And then there will be no more distinction between awareness and sensations, between content and context, background and foreground. All is equally luminous and empty. Whatever method that you use, you must take into consideration of intention, purpose, and self-invalidation. We use a thorn of a rose to remove another thorn, and then we throw them both away.
I think I'm getting it. Doing that until nothing is left? I love it. Thanks, man. You're a gem.
See, nothing is also to be negated. Then you negate the process of negation itself.
Then where am I going to stop?
Reality never stops, yet it's never gone anywhere.
Very complicated stuff. I hope I understand it.
It's only complicated if you try to think your way through this. This type of work requires you to increase your yogic intelligence, a kind of a non-dual logic that transcends your conventional way of conceiving reality. You realize that you were kind of struggling to reconcile two views. One view is enlightenment and another view is divine union. And then because that's already split, you create more split to interpret that. See that you need to create more splits. You see, you just watch how that's a perfect example of phenomenon's compounding. And then you compound more. So you just see it. You just see that happening in real time. So you rest and recognize and then cut through the illusion before you start to proliferate more. See, sentient beings are compounding phenomenons that compounds phenomenons. We don't have conditioning. We are the conditionings themselves. Afflictions can be said to be the split in consciousness. So when you try to cure afflictions with more afflictions, you're just continuing to proliferate and perpetuate the same karmic cycle, hence the Ouroboros. Now, what are karmas? They're patterns of formation with a certain trajectory. When phenomena compound, it resonates a pattern, and this pattern has volition, which leads to a certain trajectory of becoming. This is the mechanism of how one moment or mind state gives birth to the next moment and the next mind state and so on, and how one life is incarnate into another life. What we know as generational traumas are simply compounded phenomena co-resonating across generations. Form mating with form to create more forms, hence formation. Similar patterns of karmic and mind streams co-resonate, entangle with each other and so on. Again, if you don't recognize this process, you can be the cycle of samsara for eons. Sure, you can explain all this away with, oh, everything is empty anyway, oh, it's all spontaneous, which is ultimately not wrong, but then you can easily bypass with these extreme views. So rest and recognize with this passion and see how your body responds to each situation. Because it's the reaction to sensations, oh, I like this and I don't like this, or even the tendency to grasp onto or verify equanimity that perpetuate and conditions the trajectory of your becoming. It's the reaction that creates that volition, which then proliferates to cravings and grasping, which then solidifies the flow of sensations into forms and identities, which then gives birth to habitual tendencies and ways of becoming. Unless, of course, you see through this and iterate yourself through situations by inclining your mind to the right view and the right action. And right view, right action, right effort is just something that's balanced, something that's beyond extremes. And with meditation, or whatever it is that you do in life, it's finding that perfect balance between effort and effortlessness, between doing and non-doing, between surrendering and intention. And accept everything as it is, and realize that one cannot out-dissolve creation. The nature of phenomenons is that everything that arises ceases to be. Destruction is part of creation. You renounce even from renunciation, and like conditioned phenomenons exhaust all on their own accord because karmas have a way of sorting themselves out through the course of the least resistance, where all sensations simply self-liberate. You let go of even trying to let go. Do nothing meditation, there's still a sense of a doer in there, a doer that's doing nothing. That's still doing something. What's beyond free will and determinism? Non-doership is a view. Doership is also another view. Falling to either extreme, there's still a concavity in your field of experience. There's still a dome.
I wonder if everyone knows what you guys mean when you say the word concavity.
I think we just started using that word like maybe in the recently, last boot camp, yeah. The concavity is basically an invisible dome or invisible bubble, this ontological container. It's like, oh, this is my world, right? But then this concavity creates pressure points, metaphysical pressure. It's not always obvious. Sometimes you can actually feel like you're very expended or whatever, but there is still a concavity there. And what constructs that concavity, there's a lot of things, right? Like I said, metaphysical pressure, but then the way that the mind is aggregating a certain way. The reason why you feel self-conscious is because your concavity is coming into contact with other concavities. And then there's also the meaning-making system, the ontological structure that's also part of the construction of this concavity. There's a lot of different things like this going on to create this concavity. And then we talk about views. A view is basically your concavity. I guess realizing the nature of mind is at the deepest level is just convexing this concavity outward. So the mind becomes completely unimpeded. You're sitting there in your room and there's already a concavity, right? If you really believe that's a wall right there, that's already created a concavity, right? I'm sitting on a chair. I'm Frank sitting on a chair. That's a concavity. So there's perceptually, ontologically, sensorially, all these different elements create this very general sense of this is my world.
We generate our own concavity, right? It's like it's a fabricated thing.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You generally through conditioning, social agreements, life circumstances, the nature of compounded phenomena reinforcing itself over and over to create a very particular kind of concavity that you call you or my world. Yeah, and also I think concavity is okay too, right? It's just like
it's okay. It's not that it's bad.
It's a flexibility of seeing through how they construct it. Yeah.
It's like it's a game that you can play either consciously or unconsciously.
You actually really need your concavity because, I guess some of us, if we've taken some sort of psychedelic, some sort of hero's dose, like there's a small bridge in concavity, it could really mess somebody's up. And the other thing about concavity as well is like this dome that we call our life. It's not just spatially, right? There's also concavity of time. You can only see and feel kind of 5 years into the future and 5 years into the past.
I get off take a picture of people because the camera is like a penis, literally. It's like it extends and then you capture that person's essence. You fucked it, right?
It's also very feminine because it captures.
Yeah, also the light comes in. Yeah, and then you can take out the lens and it's like the hole in there, right? And then like so
there's a hole. So
so when I'm zooming in, like my lens gets longer, I'm talking more, like closer and get more details. So when I get good pictures, like I feel like a bit of an orgasm.
Clearly, you've been taking pictures all day. So
yeah, I've been feeling an orgasm. And then I post this picture online, and people get fucked, you know? They're like, oh, Elliott, nice picture.
Drink my mental code.
The metaphysical pressure of time can create concavities, right? If I think I get this many years to live, then I must accomplish this or that. Oh fuck, 5 days from now I gotta do this. Oh, the deadline is tomorrow morning.
A very visceral sense of concavity, like for example, Sina, I think from what I understand, you have had dark retreat experience before. Like even in that darkness, it doesn't feel unimpeded. It feels like there's a limit in that space, even though you can't see it.
Even the whole meaning making that goes into I'm in a dark retreat. You can actually have a very thin concavity even at the very later stage of realization. And people can get trapped in a concavity like for a long time. There's all this meaning making behind, oh, I'm everything. I'm the whole world. That's still a limit. There's still conceit. If there's an underlying core belief that, oh, everything's made up of consciousness, then this bubble of awareness, even when it's very spacious and the veil is extremely thin, it's still a dome. They say Arhats still have a very subtle affliction, right? Because they prefer Nirvana or Samsara. Basically, everything inside the dome is the known. Everything outside is the unknown. That's why this process of convexing the concavities outward, oftentimes we experience the fear of death or ontological shocks. And one way to describe roof formations are blueprints that boots up the dome, which then becomes the fundamental basis of your entire existence, dictating every aspect of your life. Roof formation generates afflictions, then obscurations and obstructions, all of which reinforce each other to construct the dome. And since the matrix by default is designed to sustain itself, to protect itself, if you don't recognize your life is confined to this concavity, everything you do reinforces and solidifies this dome. But if you're able to recognize the concavities, you have the flexibility and the fluidity to boot up different views, different domes with various geometrical structures, different modes of being that serve different functions under different circumstances. You can aggregate your way to deploy the God self or the small self. It doesn't really matter.
We ended up microwaving frozen pizzas.
Well, no need to worry about the turkey this year. Not with an oven that will do anything your father tells it to do.
Ooh, good shot.
Did you see that?
We suffer when this dome, this concavity, this dome of reality, when this self-view calcifies, right? Probably many of us have seen just on the, I don't know what to call it, spiritual marketplace. Like we carry these dualistic binary ways of relating with us, sense making, problem solving, over into our spiritual pursuits. Like when we body scan, we focus and refine a point of concentration into this tiny and tinier speck of solidity, thinking that you'll eventually get to that last speck of a sense of self. Contrarily, you keep expanding into this sense of like a pure void, what you think is a ultimate reality. This notion of expanding the field as a means of going beyond the self actually implies like this event horizon that constitutes our dome. Infinite expansion itself becomes the concavity, right? Expanding outward generates this sense of inward pressure as it references back to how we feel when we expand. So then the concavity in that sense is the structural self-referencing of experience.
Yeah, when you try to expand, there's a pressure inside that you're trying to escape. There's still a reference point between contraction and expansion, something pointing inward, outward, right? So the nature of mind has no dimension, no size. It's beyond, but includes infinity or eternity. It's all about like that pointing, right? Because you can have proliferation, quote unquote, and if the difference is like if the mind doesn't loop backwards, like a self-referential loop, then in a sense you can have a million thoughts and still not be lost in thoughts. That's what we mean by think without thinking. When you ruminate, it's when you point the thought back at something. That reference point is what creates a self-referential loop that creates a concavity, right? Without the reference points, from the subject to the object, past, future, present, or from meaning to representation to reality, whatever it is, there's no more subjective experience, because what you perceive to be inside the body or mind is just part of the evenness of the self-cognizing field. This is the 8th Bhumi territory, the immovable, according to the Bhumis model from the Bodhisattva path in Mahayana, which is the second to the third turning of the wheel of the Dharma. The 7th Bhumi is gone afar. The first is anatta, the 10th Bhumi is full Buddhahood, the cloud of Dharma.